Warning, recording has started. This meeting is being recorded. By joining, you're giving consent. Yep, no problem.
Okay.
So you guys have been following my work about remonstrance and the unlawful alterations of our form of government. They changed the Constitution. You guys been following all that?
Yes.
Yes.
Please introduce yourself and tell us all about you.
Okay. My name's John Gentry. I'm a candidate for governor of Tennessee 2022. I'm a former Force Recon Marine, and I've been an accounting professional. And I have just recognized a problem with rampant corruption in our government, in our legislative houses, and our judiciary. As a Force Recon Marine, I know how to fight. I have the discipline and the tenacity to not give up and to not back down in this fight. And my work is literally about restoring the intended republic that the founders established in our state and federal constitutions. My work is about restoring justice, which is the fair treatment of the people. And I've been very effective with this, and in this candidacy for governor, and if elected, we will literally heal this republic, heal our people of all this corruption that is going on, and we will do it so fast. We will actually drain the swamp. We will actually make America great again, and it won't be short term. It will be lasting reform. With my candidacy for state senate, I was reaching 1.2 million people. When social media shut down all social and political advertising, I dropped significantly, but I'm ramping back up, picking up more people by the day. I can say without a doubt, every citizen, if they come to know and understand my work, if they understand the restoring the principles that this republic was founded on, which is my work, if people understood this, I would literally win in a landslide. Every freedom, liberty-loving American patriot would quickly put me in office out there. The cornerstone right of our republic is the right to petition. And nobody understands what that right is today. But what that means is one person who has a grievance or has an idea about how to do things better, a single citizen or a group of citizens, get together and put together a remonstrance or a petition. A petition is seeking favor. A remonstrance is demanding reform of government acting in violation of the state constitution, or protesting unlawful conduct of government, discrimination, oppression, or violation of the Constitution. So you get together and you draft that out. You present it to your senator or your representative. They have a duty. They literally have a duty to file that with the clerk of the House or the clerk of the Senate. And then that remonstrance or petition is announced on the floor of the House or on the floor of the Senate or in joint assembly. The fact that I am the first person now to do this twice since the year 1850. It hasn't been done in 170 years. And the fact that I have had 2 remonstrances announced on the floor of the House is prima facie evidence that the right is oppressed, but it's also proof that this is how we exercise power that is inherent in the people. And this is something I want citizens to understand. I want my people to understand this. We have rights that are in our Constitution that we do not know what they mean. We do not know how to exercise them. And because we have become incompetent as a people to oversee our government, we are suffering tyranny and oppression and corruption. It's time that we start to educate ourselves. It is time we start to assert that power. In our Tennessee Constitution, we are one of 3 states in this entire republic, one of 3, that we have a right to petition by address. We have a constitutional right as a single citizen to address the legislative houses. By address, I'm talking, you think Gettysburg Address, when Lincoln addressed those assembled at the Gettysburg battlefield, the president's inaugural address. We're talking oral presentation. That's what the Constitution means when it says we have a right to petition by address and the right to instruct our representatives. And I myself just recently learned what that means by studying and researching our founding documents. So there was this was actually cited. This was actually cited in an article that was talking about the history of the Tennessee Constitution. And this is a Bill of Rights. It's a documentary history of the Bill of Rights. And it actually includes the transcripts from the committee hearings when they enacted the Bill of Rights, or in the United States federal Constitution. And in this book is a transcript of August 15th, 1789, when they were considering the right to instruct in our United States Congress. They decided not to. They decided not to include in our Bill of Rights the citizens' right to instruct our representatives. But we have it in Tennessee. And we're one of 3 states that have both the right to petition by address and the right to instruct our representatives. So what does it mean? And on August 15th, 1789, Elbridge Gerry, he was later a vice president. He was a representative in the first congressional session of our United States Congress. And he stated on August 15th, talking about the Bill of Rights and the right to instruct, he said, "Now, though I do not believe the amendment would bind the representatives to obey the instructions, yet I think the people have a right both to instruct and bind them. Do gentlemen conceive that on any occasion instructions would be so general as to proceed from all of our constituents? If they do, it is the sovereign will. Sir, gentlemen will not contend that the sovereign will presides in the legislature. The friends and patrons of this Constitution have always declared that sovereignty resides in the people and that they do not part with it on any occasion. And to say that sovereignty vests in the people and that they do not have a right to instruct and control their representatives is absurd in the last degree."
That's beautiful.
Madison said about Elbridge Gerry that if every citizen was an Elbridge Gerry, that the rights of the people would be secured from the gates of hell. That if everybody stood up for the Constitution the way Gerry did, that we would never have any of the problems that we suffer today. But what he talks about in there is if something is so general that all of the constituents want it, that's the sovereign will of the people. And he's saying that sovereign will does not reside in the legislature. It resides in the people. And in Tennessee, that's affirmed in our Tennessee Constitution, Article 1, Section 1. Power is inherent in the people. And the government is instituted for their safety, happiness, and peace, safety, and happiness. And to that end, we have an unalienable, indefeasible right to alter, reform, or abolish government in such manner as we may think proper. And Section 2, that the doctrine of non-resistance is absurd. It is absurd if we do not stand up to tyrants. It is absurd if we do not protest the Tennessee government that is acting in violation of the Tennessee Constitution, oppressing this cornerstone right, placing judges in prohibited office, protecting corruption, ignoring corruption. It is absurd that my fellow citizens will not stand with me, and they will not demand reform except on a very infrequent basis. And I was reading today, there was another article, or actually this was a book written by Cooley, who was the Michigan Supreme Court, and he talked a lot about it. And he actually said about the right of petition, if that becomes so oppressed that the citizens don't have the right to petition anymore, then they have to become and effectively, we deserve to be ruled. That's what Cooley said. We deserve what's happening to us because we as citizens have become incompetent. Well, my work is about fixing that incompetence, educating my people, and taking back power that is inherent in us and standing against this corruption out there. So, some of the questions that you asked me is, what are two of the largest issues that I would handle differently than Bill Lee? The first thing that comes to mind is the pandemic. Tennessee Constitution, Article 1, Section 25, martial law, in the sense of unrestricted power. And the definition, Black's Law Dictionary definition of martial law is control of civilians on domestic territory. And controlling civilians is exactly what mass mandates are. It's what quarantine, shutting down businesses, shutting down our churches. That is control of civilians on domestic territory. In the sense of unrestricted power, there is no vote, there is no veto. It is an executive in our state, local, county, and city governments exercising unrestricted power, mandates that they're coming out with by military officers or others as mayors, county commissioners, governors, it's everybody. It is inconsistent with the principles of a free government and is not confided to any department of this state. And when Bill Lee, first he quarantined, shut down all these businesses, executive orders that we can't assemble in our churches and exercise our right of conscience, that was unconstitutional. And very likely, because I brought this to the attention of the people, that coward, Bill Lee, delegated that authority to the county and city officials because he didn't want to stand. That was an abuse of power. That was the conduct of a tyrant. It was the conduct of a coward, in my opinion. So what I would have done differently is said, maybe we got a problem here. I don't think we do if we're healthy. If you are getting sunshine, vitamin D, a vital component of our immune system, if we're getting leafy green vegetables and we have a healthy lifestyle, there's no need to quarantine. There are some things we could have done for those that are high risk, those that have diabetes, heart conditions, breathing conditions. There's things that we could have done to allow them to stay at home and continue to pay them through their employers, subsidized by government. We could have done things like that to protect those citizens until we had a vaccine available to us. But all of that conduct is inconsistent with the principles of the free government. There was a violation of our constitutional rights. I would have done that quite differently. Recently, Lee just did something with foster care. And in my opinion, foster care is the #1 source of child trafficking in this country. Children do not run away from home they don't run away from their biological parents unless there is extreme abuse of a parent beating and raping their children, beating their spouse. Unless it's really bad, children are not going to run away from biological parents. They run away from foster care all the time. It is quite common. And just recently, we had 2 monsters out in Knoxville, part of the foster care system, that were starving children in their basement, abusing them. And because of that care, one died, they buried it in their backyard. And then they moved to a second house and buried a second child there. The fact that that happened, the state cannot guarantee the safety of children in foster care. They have done nothing to fix it. the foster and Governor Lee's recent work was to make Tennessee like the premier foster care state in this country, when it is inherently broken. It is to restore justice to our people, to restore due process, because children are wrongfully taken from parents under color of law on a routine basis. The state receives about $60 million in revenue from the federal government as incentive to take children from loving parents. About only 10 or 11% of the cases are actually abuse, sexual abuse or physical abuse. The other 89% of cases are neglect or other reasons. And those other reasons and that neglect is whatever they want it to be. Really, it's whatever they want to be. So that's something, that's something I would do different. Another question was, is my goal to educate the people, or is it to become governor? I have been candid about this from the beginning. I have no desire for office, none whatsoever. I would be content to go about my profession and to go about my life and not engage in public service, but I feel compelled out of a sense of duty. And so I offer myself, my service to the people, and if the people understand and know and want my work, they'll put me in office. But along with this campaign, it is absolutely my top campaign goal to educate the people about the unlawful alterations of our form of government, about the oppression of the cornerstone right of our form of government, the right to petition or apply to the government for redress of grievance or other proper purpose by address or remonstrance. That is essential, that we have to restore this cornerstone right. And if you guys don't understand what I'm talking about, the right of petition and the right of remonstrance, I beg you, I implore you to please learn about my work in this regard. It will literally fix everything that is wrong in this republic when we restore this right. So please take time, call me. My phone number, I'll give it to you right now. Somebody can write it in chat, 615-351-2649. Or my email, johng@wethepeoplev50.com. Contact me. I will speak with you one-on-one. I will address groups of citizens and educate you about what this right is and why it is essential that this right be restored, as well as the unlawful alterations of our form of government. Another question that was asked of me: what are my plans and priorities when I become governor, and how will I achieve them? This one's going to blow your mind. I'm going to enact term limits. I guarantee I will enact term limits. Have no doubt that if I am put in office, we will have term limits in Tennessee, and we will lead the republic in putting in place term limits in the United States Congress. I guarantee it. And how am I going to achieve this? Well, we heard from Elbridge Gerry, who's in our first congressional session, and we know from our Tennessee Constitution, power is inherent in the people. As governor, I will have the reach and the respect of the people that I will reach out to all citizens to co-remonstrate with me to the Tennessee General Assembly. And when I explain this to every citizen through a gubernatorial address to the people, perhaps my inaugural address, when I have the attention of the people, everyone will co-remonstrate, sign a remonstrance with me. And we will present that to the Tennessee General Assembly. And we will say it is the sovereign will of the people that we are asserting our power, and we are instructing you by address to amend the Constitution that senators and representatives will serve no more than 2 terms, or something else if we decided as a group. And I guarantee it, when the first thing that I will do after winning office is I'm going to assert gubernatorial of the Tennessee General Assembly, and I will convene them. And the first thing we're going to convene the General Assembly is to restore the right of petition by address or remonstrance, and to amend the Constitution that no senator, no representative will serve more than two term limits. As governor, I'll restore justice. And how I'm going to restore justice is by restoring accountability of our corrupt legal profession and our corrupt judiciary. There has not been a judge removed from office or impeached since 1960s. And the Tennessee Board of Judicial Conduct that oversees judges, that was created unconstitutionally by the Tennessee General Assembly, has never once recommended removal or impeachment. That agency is corrupt. They're aiding and abetting corruption in our judiciary, and it is also resulting in corruption across this entire spectrum of our government. When I am on office, that agency will be abolished. The Tennessee Code Commission with the Chief Justice, as well as the Tennessee Board of Judicial Conduct, those are judges holding expressly prohibited second offices of trust. I will remove them if I have to. I want to address the General Assembly and give them an opportunity. I will do it respectfully. I will give them an opportunity to repeal that legislation and to remove those judges from those prohibited offices. If they won't do it, I'll use the Tennessee Guard, and I'll do it under force if I have to. Another thing, what will I do as governor? We have an incredible problem with pretended legislation. It was a grievance in our Declaration of Independence to the king for giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. What's pretended legislation? It's legislation, the caption, the description of the bill. Oh, that sounds great. Yeah, let's do that. But when you read it, it's for corrupt purpose. And probably 8 out of 10 times it's to grant more power and to our judiciary, and to grant them more power to oppress rights and extort people under color of law. In the Tennessee Constitution, Article 3, Section 18, the governor does not have veto power, but it's the same thing. He can state in writing why he won't sign, and it has to be done in 10 days, and then he sends it back to the General Assembly. Governor Lee, to my knowledge, has never once exercised that power, and I can list off the top of my head several pretended acts of legislation that he allowed to go through.
Can you give us one really good example that we would know about?
One was because actually the senator that I was running against last race, he's proposed legislation that records custodians can seek a restraining order against somebody who's harassing them trying to get public records. So it's like doing a FOIA request, an open records request, and then they don't give it to you. So you get angry, and you're like, why don't you do your job? And then that state official's like, oh, now I feel harassed. And so they go to the judge and they say, I want a restraining order against this person. I fought against that last time. And then this time, Hale put it back in, and I defeated it last time just by showing up. They're like, oh, Gentry's here. We don't want to hear from him, but we're going to shut this down. And we're not going to well, Hale came right back in this session. And these guys, they do this time after time, is they keep pushing this legislation in. And it's why everything is wrong. You know, Thomas Jefferson, 1821, he said the dissolution of our form of government lies in the power of the judiciary and irresponsible body, working like gravity by night and by day, gaining a little today and a little tomorrow, like a thief over the field of jurisdiction, until all shall render powerless the check of one branch over the other, and shall become as venal and oppressive as the government from which we separated. It's exactly where we are today, pushing this garbage pretended legislation through there. Last session was the SLAPP bill. I went down and testified against the SLAPP bill, and I proved to them it was pretended legislation, and they still push that bill through. And now they're using it in litigation already for exactly the same reasons that I protested it. And Governor Lee and all the governors before him just signed this garbage legislation. I can guarantee you, I will not sign it. I will send it back. And not only will I send it back unsigned, stating reasons why I won't sign it, I will address the people and put out a video to the people saying, here's what they're doing, and it's corrupt. And I want no part of it. And I want the people to stand with me and call your representatives and tell them they better not enact this garbage pretended legislation. And we will start to restore power in the people by doing this, taking control of our government.
Will you care what letter is after their name if you need to do something like this?
Say that again?
Are you going to care if they have an R or a D after their name?
I do not care. The legislation that goes through there from the Republicans is just as corrupt when it comes to oppressing rights. Now there's some stuff that they're like, oh, I'm a Republican, abortion, or and so I'm gonna look good for that. But all of the pretended legislation, when you look at it and you look at the board in the General Assembly, there's like every single one of them are voting for it, whether they're Democrat or Republican. It's garbage, and whether they got an R and a D, they're all voting for it. And I will call out whether they are an R or a D, and I will state my opinion on that legislation and why it's wrong. And I am extremely good at peeling back what these bills are about and why they're corrupt. I'm very good at it. If you've watched any of my testimonies down in the General Assembly, you'll know I'm good at it.
Mm-hmm. So the pillars of your campaign, we see them and they're strong, but you're right, the people need to be educated. So if you are elected governor, is one of your primary roles going to be to educate people about what their rights are and how to exercise them? And what kind of education campaign are you going to have? How are you going to reach the people to help teach them about what they're supposed to be, what they're supposed to know, what they're supposed to be doing?
I feel confident that if I can have 30 minutes of every voter's time, that I'll win this election in a landslide. I have no doubt if I can have 30 minutes and explain what my work is about, that we're going to get term limits, that we're going to restore the right of remonstrance, that we're going to restore the form of government. If I have 30 minutes to explain that and people understand what that's about, they're like, man, this guy's like Patrick Henry, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson all rolled up in one. And it's just because I've gathered the knowledge of all of those guys.
So what about after you're elected, though?
But what you're asking about is how are we going to fix this long term? This is a school book from 1929, History of Tennessee, and this school book was fifth through seventh grade, and they had the Tennessee Constitution in here. They don't have the Tennessee Constitution at all. Nobody teaches the Tennessee Constitution at all. We have to, and I believe, even though we have some liberal education systems in the state, like Metro Nashville, like Memphis, I am quite confident when I explain the founding principles to our educators out there and why those founding principles are so essential to the American way of life, and how to teach properly, and we'll incorporate that into civics. Governor Lee mandated civics training, but I can guarantee you there is nothing about the right of remonstrance, the right of petition. There is nothing about the form of government that has been unlawfully altered. None of that will be taught, not properly taught. So I think that when I have time with educators as governor, that I can convince them, because unless you're part of corruption and you start to understand my work, if you're a freedom-loving American, you're going to stand by my work. I don't care if you're liberal. I don't care if you're conservative. I don't care if you've never voted before, or so disenfranchised that you don't vote anymore. If you're a freedom-loving American and you come to know about what my work is, you'll stand with me. And I believe that's true of our educators as well. That if they just understand, why the founders established the form of government that they did, and what that form of government is, when our educators understand that and start to teach that to our children, I think it's going to fix everything.
So since we're on the subject of education, let's talk about CRT for a bit, because I know you have a strong opinion about that. So tell us what you think about CRT, and what would you do about rogue teachers who've stated they're going to keep teaching CRT, even though legislation has sort of loosely banned that?
Well, it very much reminds me of the Butler Act. And that the violation of the Butler Act, that was that you could not teach evolution in public schools. This was back in the 1920s. They enacted the Butler Act, said you can't teach evolution. And that resulted in the Scopes trial. That was the biggest trial in the history of this entire republic. It was the first radio broadcast trial in the history of this republic. They had reporters from all over the country, hundreds of them, as well as reporters from the UK, that all descended on a small town, Dayton, Tennessee, and started talking about the Butler Act and teaching evolution. I think this would be a great opportunity to expose, just like that trial did, is to expose the fraud, the deception of this critical race theory that's only purpose is to divide us, to separate us. And much of this, all of this is the work, or all of this is at the heart of my work, which is about the corruption in the judiciary. Why do they want to divide us? It's much of it is to create litigation. It's a revenue stream for the attorneys. When we're divided, we fight. It's also, when we're divided, we're less focused on the corruption of government as we are angry at our fellow citizens. These divisive tactics that they're using, and it's the same thing with identity politics, hate crime legislation. All of that stuff is meant to divide us, to create litigation. And this is a big part of my work, is that a lot of this is all to establish more power and generate this legislation. Much of it is to generate revenue for the legal profession. Another reason to sue somebody, another reason to incarcerate somebody, another reason to take children away. And it's all to force you to hire attorneys to defend you in a system that is inherently corrupt. So it's all extortion under color of law.
So the legislation right now basically has no teeth in it. I mean, it bans critical race theory. It doesn't use that phrase, but it doesn't really have teeth. And because there are plenty of teachers who say they're still going to teach it. So how would you want to sanction those teachers and put a final stop to them teaching?
I think that the best way, I think that the best way to talk about this is to get out to the people and talk to the people about, once the people understand what the founding principles were, we're a melting pot, and the Constitution was written so that we can all get along. And the tenets of this critical race theory about, white supremacy or white privilege and those things, they can't exist. They can't exist if the right to petition is restored. I mean, it fixes everything that this critical race theory wants to fix is already fixed if you understood the Constitution. It is literally already fixed in there. Everything that they're purporting to address with social injustice, social inequality is already fixed in the Constitution if government would just adhere to it.
So if teachers are teaching CRT despite what the legislation says, are you saying then that parents can get together and petition and stop that teacher from teaching it?
We have a right to instruct our representatives, and so this is what I'm saying, to fix this problem of them teaching. Citizens get together and go petition the legislature for them to exert power over the school board to remove that teacher.
So the legislature has power over the school board to do that.
What's that?
The legislature has power over the school board to do that.
They can certainly legislate for it.
Okay. Because one of the problems too is that, like, in I think Murfreesboro, the superintendent of schools has simply changed the name of critical race theory to some other bizarre name, and they're teaching it under that name and then saying, well, we're not teaching critical race theory anymore. We're teaching this, but it's the same thing.
And see, we have smart citizens out there like you guys. And we have the ability to organize like never before with social media. The problem is people just don't believe in the right of petition because they don't understand it. The first time I exercised that right in January of 2019, the entire Tennessee Board of Judicial Conduct, all of the judges, about 10 of them, were removed from office.
Really?
They vacated that entire agency because of my remonstrance. That was just one citizen. Imagine what happens when a lot of us get together. But part of my work is also re-educating government. I'm teaching them right now that, hey, we got a right to instruct you. We have a right to petition by address. I'm not asking, I'm telling. I'm asserting rights here. I'm not asking your permission to do this, I'm telling you. Now, they don't have to obey my instructions. But what came out of that August 15, 1789 discussion is when the people instruct them, they have a duty to consider. They have a duty to hear first, consider the instructions, and then decide whether to obey or not obey those instructions. But when that is done publicly, and then the people see what kind of person they really are, then we know who to get rid of and who to replace in our state government.
Would you, if you were governor, would you replace Penny Lee Schwinn, the Commissioner of Education?
More than likely. I mean, I would have, I'm not just about firing people, but coming from California and the mess that is out there, I would have to have some very hard conversation about what are you teaching our young people, and if it is not preparing our children mathematically, with English skills and with civic skills. What she is proposing does not accomplish that. Absolutely. You know, that's my question to anybody in education is, are our children prepared mathematically, grammatically, and civic and with civic duty to steer this country forward? And if they're not, then, and if you don't have a plan for that, I'll find somebody else that does have a plan for it.
So while we're on the subject of kids, what do you think about the Tennessee Health Department and Governor Lee's Commissioner Lisa Piercy marketing COVID treatments to children?
Well, you know, again, that comes back under Article 1, Section 25. They can't mandate this stuff. Pushing something into children that are no risk. I mean, literally no risk for children. It's completely unnecessary, and the risk associated with it far outweighs, you know, what the potential of being vaccinated is. So absolutely. Also, you know, Piercy was big into deciding about child abuse and child neglect, and that scares me about anybody in government, you know, that is talking about child neglect. You know, there's the only reason that a child should be separated from their parents is if there's physical abuse, sexual abuse, or intentional deprivation of food, clothing, and shelter. That's it. You cannot take children away for what you think is neglect, because, you know, where do you draw the line on what is neglect? Because, you know, I could go out and say, you know, sticking your kid in front of a TV and giving them a big bag of potato chips and letting them become obese, in my opinion, that's neglect. But you know, some parents, that's how they babysit their children, is with food and the TV. But it's not grounds for taking that child away from those parents. Or because a parent doesn't want to vaccinate their child. Or, I mean, there's so many things I've heard, like people have their electricity turned off because they can't afford it. And so they say, you know, oh, that's neglect. You can't care for your child. You don't have electricity, so we're going to take your kid. I mean, they have this myriad of excuses. So Lisa Piercy scares me, you know, in that regard, you know, as well as, you know, mandating vaccinations for children or pushing that. There's no reason to push that. I think it is absolutely ridiculous.
On June 16th, at the Joint Government Operations Committee meeting, the committee specifically told Lisa Piercy to stop marketing the COVID treatments to children. They specifically told her to knock it off. Those were the exact words, knock it off. And every day since then, we've discovered that she's still doing it. The health department's still doing it. The Department of Education is still doing it on their website. The Governor Lee's big vaccination campaign is still going ahead with marketing to children.
Why is she not held in contempt of the General Assembly?
Exactly.
You know,
They're still doing it.
Congress, she's in contempt of the General Assembly, and nobody brings that up.
On July 21st, this committee is going to reconvene, and Lisa Piercy is supposed to reappear. And I don't know what they're going to do, but they were talking about reconstituting the Department of Health. So what do you think of that?
I think we should all, the three of us, should talk about, let's go down there and testify. Let's go down there and assert our right to address the government and to instruct them. Let's go down there, and the three of us, let's do it. Let's set an example. So let's the three of us get together. We'll find out when that committee hearing is. We'll contact the chair of the committee, and we will request permission to speak on that. We'll organize it between ourselves. You've seen me do it many times. Why don't we all three go down there and let's go talk about it?
How many more than 3 can we take? More than 3? How about 50?
It's,
How about 100?
I mean, you just have to, here's the process, is you go to the chair of the committee and you say, I'm asserting my Article 1, Section 23, right, to apply to the powers of government for proper purpose. I want to talk to you. I'm asserting my right to do that, as well as to instruct you of what I want you to do. And I would like to come and testify at this hearing. And then they'll put you on the agenda, and we go down there and talk. I think as many people as want to come can go down there and talk about it.
Okay, well, we're going to put together the people, and we're going to meet with you again to discuss this, and we're going to do it. And we've got 2 other big groups of people who will join us.
We'll have to see who the chair of the Government Ops Committee is. There's some of them that don't.
They're
like
very
me talking.
friendly. They're very friendly. They're the chair and the vice chair, and pretty much everyone on that committee was very upset with Lisa Piercy and was very vocal about it. And the chair would definitely be amenable to this.
It switches off on that committee because it's joint. Sometimes it's a House, sometimes it's a senator, and they rotate that around. I don't know who's the chair right now. I've seen Senator Pody, Senator Kerry.
Kerry is the Senate chairman right now. So yes, let's do that. Let's do that. Well, let's talk about election fraud because we're very active in election fraud and we're working with a lot of other groups on this issue. So we want to know what your views are on the 2020 November election and the ongoing audits.
Well, so there is no doubt that there was election fraud. I mean, we saw it in Georgia where they're pulling out ballots after everything's shut down on video. There are affidavits that have been filed in court in the battleground states in Trump's lawsuits. There was absolutely fraud. Now, how this should have been handled by President Trump is instead of calling his supporters to go to Washington and protest the election, what President Trump should have done is he should have called on everyone to electronically sign a memorial and remonstrance protesting concern of election fraud in the battleground states, seeking redress of an audit of those election results. President Trump would take that and remonstrance and file it with a member of the House, and a member of the House would file it with the clerk of the House. And then it would be announced on the floor and referred to committee for deliberation. And all those affidavits, all that evidence would have been considered. And then the committee members of the House would have decided whether or not to grant the redress. It would also, and this is in the United States Congress, they have rules of order. This is the rules of order for the United States Congress. And Rule 12, Section 3 says a member having a petition shall file it with the clerk. So President Trump would get 80 million signatures. Everybody that voted for him would sign it. I would be right there signing it myself. I actually proposed this to about 6 senators here in Tennessee. I called about 6 senators and a couple House members, and I said, why are we sitting on our hands? Why are we not doing something? I was like, why don't you get the Republican caucus here in Tennessee to write up a memorial and remonstrance complaining that the votes of Tennessee have been negated by fraud in these battleground states, and we want the redress of an audit. And some of the senators that I spoke with, they're like, man, that's a good idea. But they don't want to do it because they do not want to restore the right of remonstrance. They want that right to be oppressed so much so that they're willing to give up the presidency.
Wow. So what do you think about an election here in Tennessee?
But let's I'm gonna finish this up. So let's say now in the Senate, the Senate has rules too. And it says before the remonstrance, it must also be signed by the president. I'm pretty sure Trump would have signed his own remonstrance and filed it with the clerk of the Senate, right? So now you've got 80 million people, half the country, half of the registered voters, more than half the registered voters, lawful registered voters, protesting the election. They would have to hear it. And the evidence, now that the corrupt courts that Trump went to with his lawsuits, they all dismissed it and said, yeah, there was fraud, but it wasn't enough to affect the outcome, so you don't have standing, on your way. Those were wrongfully dismissed, and the attorneys that are representing Trump corrupt because they won't go in there and do a motion for an evidentiary hearing, and you can't and do discovery. You know, a judge can't say there's not enough evidence if he hasn't been presented the evidence, if you haven't done discovery. That is basic to judicial process. And so Trump's own attorneys, in my opinion, are either incompetent or conspired against him and allowed these cases because, you know, election fraud is common at the state and local level across this country. And so if we expose it in the presidential election and try to fix it, then it fixes all of the local elections. You know, yes, like would I want it done here in Tennessee? You know, in my election for state senate, Davidson County reported I had 51% of the vote at 8 p.m. An hour later, I had 47% of the vote. Now, I don't know why Davidson County would change their election results. Maybe there were mail-in ballots for Senator Hale, who I was running against. I don't know. I don't think so. But I don't really care about auditing the results here in Tennessee. But what I do care about is fixing it long term. And here's how. Here's how you fix it long term. Every voter must re-register. And when they re-register, it is the same process as setting up a new bank account. Because of 9/11 and concern of people opening bank accounts and transferring money to terrorist organizations, you now have, when you open a bank account, you have to prove who you are. And how you prove that is getting driver's license, passport. You also have to show that you're a resident. And so they want to see a utility bill or something that has your name on it with the address that you're at. So the same process that banks use to verify you're a real person living where you say you live is what we need to do, and get all of these dead voters off the records and get them off of the results. So everybody has to re-register, and you re-register the same way that you register for a bank. Then we're going to have two parts to the election. There's going to be an online election where you register. When you register for this account, you're also going to set up an online registration with two-factor authentication. So you know, with Facebook, with a bank account, if you try to change your password, it sends a text to your message, and it says, if you want to change it, you got to enter in this 6-digit or 4-digit number or whatever it is. You got to enter that in. Now, if you're trying to commit fraud and you have to do two-factor authentication that's going to another phone or an email, you can't do that on a large-scale basis. You can't commit fraud with two-factor authentication on a large-scale basis. But we also go to the polls. Unless you're disabled, unless you're a veteran stationed overseas and you have an absentee ballot for good cause, you're still going to go to the polls. And the results of the online election with two-factor authentication, as well as the in-person polls, are compared, and discrepancies are investigated. You know, if somebody voted online for an R, but they voted in person for a D, what's up with that? Or if there's just a large difference. And I back to paper ballots with these, or the old machines that they had for grade schools, like they talk about the hanging chads down in Florida when Al Gore, fought that Florida election down there. But those machines that read that, that's not software. That's, was there a hole? Is there not a hole? I think something like that, rather than just, one person counting a paper ballot. But I think, with some kind of punch system or something like that, something that we used to have. But I think it needs to be a dual system. It has to be online with two-factor authentication as well as in person. And everybody has to re-register again using the same system that the proof of who you are that the banks use.
What about voting machines? Would you like to get rid of all the voting machines and go back to paper ballots?
Absolutely. Yeah, we cannot trust that if we're seeing, with these Russian hackers accessing fuel pipelines and food production, if they can hack that and disrupt our fuel supply, they were out of gas in the Northeast. Like Virginia, there was no gas to be found up there for a couple of days. And that was from Russian hackers. We know it was. They paid them off. If they can hack into that, I'm pretty sure our voting machines can be hacked into as well.
Well, we would like to go back to paper ballots, this group. And right now we're seeing kind of a discrepancy between what the Secretary of State is telling us about how he's a fan of paper ballots, but what we're seeing in a lot of the counties is that they're wanting to either keep or change voting systems to different machines.
What do you think? Like, if you went out and asked the people today, do you want to keep Dominion or get rid of it? What do you think they're going to say? The people, what do you think they're going to say?
I think most of the people don't understand what the problem is.
Are you kidding me? And every person that voted for Trump does not want Dominion voting machines.
Oh, no, I think those people, but I think we're talking about just Tennesseans in general. I think a lot of people don't understand what the general problem is with voting machines, and that they can be accessed through the internet, and that a lot of them don't have paper ballots.
Tennessee is a red state, right?
Yes.
Most of the people want to get rid of Dominion, right?
I hope so.
So if we just remonstrated.
There are two counties that have Dominion right now, but a lot of counties have ES&S, which has a lot of the same problems. And now we're doing research on microvote too.
If we got together and remonstrated and said, we're instructing you, you got most of the people here telling you.
Would it have to be people from each of the counties that want to get rid of their voting system, or can a group of people go and remonstrate for all the counties?
I think
to get rid of machines.
I think there's no rules on it. There are literally no rules. We express our opinion and we give instructions, and it's up to them to decide.
That's a good idea. What about recalls? Do you support recalls, expanding recall to elections to even local offices?
You're talking about recalling elected officials?
Yeah, we're switching gears here a little bit to recalls. Like, for instance, there are several counties with school board members that cannot be recalled. And even some counties that have local offices that you can't recall. You can't recall the people.
Tennessee Constitution, Article 1, Section 23. I've been pounding this, and I don't know why. Citizens have a right to apply to the powers of government. Powers of government is any branch, executive, judicial, legislative. Powers of government is any level of government. County, state, it doesn't matter. Get the people together, remonstrate, and demand this. but we have a right to apply. And when there is, if it is so general that everybody wants it, just like Jerry said, it is the sovereign will of the people. I don't know how to not, I've explained this 10 ways and saying the same thing. We have got to start asserting our power. The power is inherent in us, not these bozos in office.
So right now in Wilton County, the school board members, we're told, cannot be recalled. And you're telling us that we can, because that would make a lot of people very happy when we convey this message.
You get the people together, you remonstrate, and you present it to whatever head official and say, we're not asking, all the people want this. And they have a duty to hear, consider, and decide your application. You know, Thomas Jefferson, 1821, he said the Tennessee Constitution is the least imperfect and the most Republican. When you think like, what is Republican? What does that mean? You know, Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution says that the United States shall guarantee every state a Republican form of government. Well, we know from what I told you about Representative Jerry in the first Congress, who was also Vice President Jerry. You know, we know from him that sovereignty resides in the people, not in the legislative houses, right? When they were putting in the Constitution, they were debating Article 4, Section 4. The governor of Virginia objected. The original language was proposed by James Madison. It said the United States ought to guarantee a Republican form of government. Governor of Virginia objected, and that might have been Patrick Henry. They objected, and then they came out with the final language: shall guarantee a Republican form of government. And it was a lawyer from Pennsylvania in support of the final language. He said no state ought to be able to transform itself into a monarchy. So when we're talking about Republican form of government, we're talking about who's the ruler, who's going to rule us. And it's not a king, it's not a monarchy, right? And it's not a democracy. It's not rule of the many. The founders knew what a democracy was, and they would have said the United States shall guarantee a democratic form of government. No. And we know it by default, it's not an oligarchy, which is rule of the few. Mm-hmm. So it's not rule of one, monarchy. It's not rule of the few, which is an oligarchy, and it's not rule of the many, which is democracy. Who's the ruler? Individual. We know the sovereign power resides in the people, and the rule of law. That's where that term comes from. Is rule of law. That's who rules us. That's who our ruler is the law. And the supreme law is our state and federal constitutions. That's how we rule ourselves. That's how we assert that's our sovereign power inherent in the people. And so, you know, that's what Article 1, Section 1, power inherent in the people. Article 1, Section 23, we have a right to instruct. We have a right to do it by address or remonstrance. We have to start asserting those rights. And when these corrupt local, county, state officials decline to hear us and decline to obey our instructions, you know, then we have to keep pressing the fight and get in front of a chancery court and tell them to perform their duty. They have a duty to at least listen to us. If we're asserting our right to address them, they have a duty to listen to us. You know, so when you assert that right, do it by address. So can I share screen on this thing or no?
I don't know. Do you have a screen share button there that you can?
I'll just read it, but I'll just show it to you. So you can see that whole doc. That's it. That's the whole document. Not much to it, right? There's not much to it. So this is the last remonstrance. I'm going to read it to you. The title of this is Application by Address. I want to address the House. And it's the subject of it is restoration of the right to apply for redress agreements or other proper purpose by address or remonstrance. That's the subject. I want to restore this right. It says to Representative Garrett, a large number of citizens from across the state of Tennessee assert right to apply to the powers of government for redress agreements and proper purpose by address pursuant to Tennessee Constitution Article 1, Section 23. The right of citizens to remedy by due course of law and justice administered without delay, which is in Section 17, and the right to instruct, which is the obligatory clause in Section 23, are rights also hereby asserted, requiring this application to be heard, considered, and decided according to the supreme law and the conscience of the members. This application, made by good citizens of the state of Tennessee, seeks resolution for the members to welcome proper petitions and remonstrances and to hear and decide them as required by our beloved Tennessee Constitution. And this application further seeks resolution to reinstate the Propositions and Grievances Committee. Very short, very concise. I'm just saying, there's a bunch of us. We're asserting some rights here. And here's what we want. And so now the next step is to address them. And the speaker, Cameron Sexton, is oppressing that. He's ignoring me. So now next week, I'm going to file a writ of mandamus against Speaker Sexton, asking him to perform his duty to assemble the body to hear an address of the people seeking to restore this right. So that's all you do is you file something like that. Email me, I'll send you a copy of this and say we're asserting our right to talk about this garbage and we want to do it by address. So we want to come and speak to you about this. That's what and then you get up there and address them and say here's what's wrong and here's what needs to be done.
So any of those documents that you're referring to, if you have those in digital form, would you email those to me so we can post them in our group?
Absolutely.
That would be great. I know every one of us would love to have that.
Yeah, this is the letter from Representative Garrett, and this was read on the House floor. I mean, I saw
that video.
That's really powerful.
Yeah.
That I could go around to a bunch of people across the state and say, hey, will you remonstrate with me to restore this right? And everybody that hears me like, sure, where do I sign? And then they read that on the floor, and I have the attention of the entire House. That's powerful.
Very.
And when we get all of us, and I'm telling you, when we get all of us, and if I get in office, I guarantee we're going to have term limits. I guarantee it.
Good. So when Biden starts his big gun grab, what would you do as governor to stop him from, asserting that authority in Tennessee? We understand what our sheriffs, our county sheriffs, we understand what their authority is as far as standing in the gap for citizens. But if you're governor and Biden starts the big gun grab, what would you do?
Well, I'm a strong defender of all rights, but the right to bear arms against a wrongful government it's absolutely worthless. It is. I mean, if I went down to the Tennessee General Assembly, I was a 4th Recon Marine for 8 years. I know how to fight. I mean, I know how to fight like really good. If we want to go to combat, I'm not somebody you want to meet on the battlefield. I'm a very good fighter. If I had geared up and put on body armor, grabbed the AR-15 and 10-30 round magazines, and went down to the general, I don't know how far I would have got, But I can tell you, nothing would have happened. They would have labeled me a crazy person. And there would have been no reform. Instead, I remonstrated, and I got the entire Tennessee Board of Judicial Conduct removed from office, and I got that agency reconstituted now with 6 citizens instead of just all judges. Still corrupt. Now, but we still need and must have the right to bear arms to defend ourselves against home invasion and criminals, absolutely. But I'll say it, against a wrongful government, it's worthless. It's absolutely worthless right. But what we do as a people is we remonstrate. And so we get together with other governors and with the people, and we get signatures from the people. You know, this stuff about taking our arms away, I think that there are very few liberals out there that would say, yeah, I think everybody should have their arms taken away. Who wants to take our arms away is corrupt government officials, and they are a very small minority. So if we use the power of remonstrance and we get signatures and we prove that it's not just conservatives, it's not just, you know, rednecks, it's everybody. We all want to keep in their arms largely. You know, there's a few, you know, way out far left people that are so ignorant of our history that think nobody should have guns with the cops and the military. I mean, you know, their knowledge is just so oppressed, and they have no understanding of why this country was founded and why we have the form of government that we have and why we have the right to keep and bear arms. There's a few of them out there, but I think a large percentage of liberals are not all too keen on taking everybody's guns away either.
They probably have guns of their own. So before we end our session with you, I want to ask about nullification and convention of states. You want to talk about that for a few minutes? How you feel about those?
Well, nullification. You're talking about jury nullification, or no?
Larry, you want to clarify? Hold on, he's on mute.
Well, while you're looking that up, I'll talk about convention.
Talking about
The what?
I was talking about nullification of unconstitutional laws that Thomas Jefferson was actually an advocate for. It's up to the people of the states to determine what laws are constitutional, not constitutional, not up to the Supreme Court, which he said if we left it up to them, we would be just ruled by an oligarchy of people. But nullification of unconstitutional orders by the parent of our governmental system, which is the states. The federal government's the child of the states.
Oh,
therefore, nullification, which again Thomas Jefferson said is a great resource.
Well, the rights and everything in the Constitution, you just can't say, oh, well, you know, we're going to nullify that. I mean, it's common sense to me. I'd have to look more fully and understand, you know, what you're talking about with it. I haven't dug into that area of law too much. But, you know, when you talk about constitutional convention, I have some very strong feelings about that. Is, you know, when you look at who our representatives are and the rampant corruption that is coming out of our General Assembly as well as our United States Congress, do you really want to trust them to alter the Constitution? I don't. I do not.
Are you familiar with the 10th Amendment Center?
Any powers not granted to the federal government are reserved to the states or to the people, right?
Well, no, I mean the 10th Amendment Center, the organization 10th Amendment Center. They have a lot of really, Rob Nadelson, and they have a lot of really great resources for You probably,
Yeah,
probably not familiar with them. I'll send you a link.
I'm telling you, when you see how tricky these guys are, when you dig into bills and you look at like how tricky, liar, cheater, deceptive they are.
Yeah.
You know, when you understand that, I have no trust of them that they're going to pervert our Constitution. If we give them any opportunity to change our Constitution, it ain't going to be good. I have no trust of them at all. So I think, you know, we're very fortunate here in Tennessee. Our Constitution, and this is one of the reasons that Tennessee has done so well compared to states like California. Like Californians have something like 59 amendments to their California Constitution. They actually, like California, they have a clause like ours, Article 6, Section 7, no judge shall hold any other office of trust. They had that in California. They took that out and they put in their Judicial Qualifications Commission and gave judges second offices of trust, and they protect rampant corruption. They changed their Constitution and did it. Here in Tennessee, the only way you can change the Tennessee Constitution is it has to be proposed by one General Assembly, but they can't do it. It has to go to a second General Assembly. So you have to go through a whole nother election of representatives, you know, so before it can do it. And before you elect them, it has to be put out to the people 6 months before that election, so that the people have 6 months to go to the representatives and say, you going to vote for that change in the Constitution or not? They have 6 months for the people to vet their representatives before they vote for them. Then, after that second General Assembly says, yeah, we want to change the Constitution, then it has to go to the people, and it has to be voted on by the citizens and in a gubernatorial election. That's hard. The founders were wise in making it so difficult to change our Constitution. Now, when you talk about a constitutional convention, like what would you want? Like one thing I want is term limits, right? We don't have to do a constitutional convention. We can do a remonstrance. 98% of the people of this country want term limits in the United States Congress, right? That is the sovereign will of the people. And no matter who you vote into office, you know, you may get one good guy, he proposes a bill for term limits, right? But all the rest of them say, get out of here. We're not voting for that. Or they'll, you know, it always goes away. And you never get term limits, right? Congress, United States Congress enacted term limits for the president. They did that pretty quickly. It's in the 25th Amendment, right? They did that, but they won't do it for themselves, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because in their mind, sovereignty resides in the legislature.
That's right.
But they're wrong, because the Constitution says we the people.
Mm-hmm.
And so how we fix that is we don't need a constitutional convention. What we need is a remonstrance expressing the sovereign will of the people, and they have no choice. And if they refuse, then they evidence that they're in treason, and that sovereignty resides with them and no longer with the people. And we're going to have a lot of pissed off Americans if they try that. And I know in my heart that if I'm governor and I do an address to the people and say, I want you to co-remonstrate with me to the General Assembly that we want term limits here in Tennessee, I guarantee you every Tennessean is going to stand with me and sign that. And we will have term limits here in Tennessee. And when we do that here, Tennessee, the volunteer state, is going to lead the republic, because we're going to say, look what the volunteer state did. We put in term limits of our General Assembly. We just showed you how to do it. We did it by States Congress. And so we as Tennesseans then reach out to the entire republic and say, remonstrate with Tennessee that we want term limits in the United States Congress. We do not want any more Pelosi's, Schumer's, or any of the rest of them, whether they have an R or a D. We want them there for 8 years and no more. Get them out. Because this corruption embeds when you have long-term senators and representatives. And I guarantee you, if you put me in office, we will have term limits in Tennessee. And I am extremely confident that when we show how it's done here, we'll get it done in the United States Congress. We will change. We'll restore the republic, starting here in Tennessee. I know this in my heart.
John, before we close, I just want to let you know that when Lee was campaigning the first time around, he had his little contract with Tennesseans, and his 10 for 10, Governor Lee, when he was campaigning, he had his contract with Tennesseans, and it had what was called the 10 for 10. And one of those 10 was to press for term limits. And I've never heard a single word out of his mouth about it. And I know that was part of his 10 for 10 because it's important to Tennesseans. So we all love what you're saying about this. And we're all big fans of recall power and remonstrance. And in fact, I think one of our first acts after we talk to you is to start an education campaign about remonstrance so that we can help people understand they have that power. So I don't think they know.
You have my sworn oath that if I'm put in office, that I will reach out to Senate. I'll do it anyway, whether I'm in office or not, but I know I can get it done as governor. You have my oath that I will reach out to all of Tennessee and ask them to remonstrate with me to the General Assembly to amend the Constitution to include term limits for senators and representatives. You have my word on that.
Well, thank you. I mean, we really appreciate you talking to us. And you have our oath that when you do this, you're going to have our support. We're going to help you do it. You've covered a lot of ground, and it's been incredible. I just want to give other people here a chance if we missed anything.
You will never hear any in office or seeking office standing up to corruption the way I am. You will never hear anybody out there fighting to restore the voice and power of the people and the right of petition. Nobody is doing it. Nobody has the courage or the integrity or the knowledge to stand up and say these judges are holding prohibited offices in violation of the Constitution. There's nobody out there doing it except for me. And I will not cease in this fight. I will never surrender. I can't be bought. I cannot be intimidated, and I will not be silenced.
John, thank you so much. I don't think anybody has any questions. We really sat down and put together some tough questions, and I think you've covered all of them. I know Larry Linton has a podcast called Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, and I know he wants to schedule you to meet with him and be on his podcast soon. And we'd like to have you back again several times, actually, to address even our newer members that come into the group so that they can all understand exactly what your platform is.
Anytime. I'm honored and privileged to speak with citizens. And so anytime you want to get me back, if you would, please give me a copy of this.
I will.
I'll put it out on my social media page. I'm sure other citizens are interested. It's, good questions, and I appreciate you pushing me.
Well, the quality is not great on the video, but I think it's good enough to definitely publish, and we'll put it out on our social media too. One of our members just said, second time I've heard him speak and was blown away again and learned even more. So we really appreciate you, John Gentry. We really do. And we want to help you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. God bless, and God speak to us all.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.